Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Harm Reduction Report. You're listening to Sandbagger News on KEQQ Radio. It is January 20th, 2019. And from the Sandbagger Newsroom, I bid you a most sincere welcome. Thank you for being here. I myself am feeling very grateful to be here. It's been a while since we've put out an episode, and that's basically because I haven't made the time to make it happen. Frankly, grad school has kicked my butt a little bit, in a good way, but near the end of the semester there, the last couple months or more now, I just haven't been able to do a sincere job. So when I realized I was struggling to make the episodes come out every week, I decided to get extra mindful about it. And what I am bringing back to the community here now, the updated version of where we're going with this, I hope is, I put a lot of effort into it, at least. I put a lot of my intention into it, trying to make this a useful thing for everybody. So as you may recall, I'm from Grand Forks, but I've been living in Colorado for the last 5 semester when I started grad school here. Just had 5 weeks off for winter break. I got to go back home and hung out in Minneapolis also, and then flew to California. Was there for a couple weeks. Just back here now before class starts up again. And as I've done some thinking about what I'm doing with my life, it's been a good time to think about what is the harm reduction report and what direction do we want to go with this? What has stood out as really interesting and what has sort of been like, okay, cool, but there's cooler stuff to talk about. I've been thinking about it, but I want to think about it out loud with you. So I thought it'd be nice to start today's episode by walking through the list of episodes we've put out so far. So this, for those of you keeping track at home, is our 42nd episode, our 42nd week, usually about an hour long. So our 42nd hour of content of show, and it's been really fun, but I think we can do better. But just already glancing at this list of things we've done, I realize, we have done a lot. We've talked about a lot of things and had a few fun little adventures in different ways we've been able to share it through videos or panels the city put together or other things we were covering for the shows. But let's take a stroll down memory lane. Let's see where the harm reduction report has been so far. And then let's think together about where we should go from here. What I guess harm reduction is a very broad topic, as I'll get into after we go through the list. This whole thing really began as something we wanted to do specifically about substance use, a way to reduce stigma around substance use and harm reduction as it applies to substance use, basically. And, of course, harm reduction applies to much, much more than that. Substance use is just one area where it applies, but that was our focus for most of these episodes. And I have a feeling we're going to start broadening it out now, because I myself have come to realize that the harm reduction report doesn't have to just report on that harm reduction. Now, there is more, but let's see what we have done so far, shall we? Well, indeed, I do remember recording our very first episode. We were in Cal Datz's apartment. You could hear the downtown party scene bumping in the background because he lives just above the bars down there. And the other thing I remember hearing, sitting in that little closet near the alley in his 3rd story building above the bars in downtown, was the pigeons that were staked out in this weird little crook in the building. It was kind of like this secluded area on the roof where there's a bunch of pipes sticking out and stuff right outside this window. And we could hear the pigeons keeping close together and cooing to each other while the music was bumping below us all. And it was a really nice place, actually, to have a thoughtful conversation about harm reduction as we were seeing it then. The very second episode we recorded, Cal interviewed his father, Dr. Kurt Datz, who is, among other things, well, he's a physician, and he is a prescriber of Suboxone, which is opioid-assisted treatment for opioid addictions. And Cal himself is, as we've talked about a lot on the show, has been a patient of Suboxone to help treat his ongoing recovery. And his father is a doctor who prescribes this to other people. And so they had a really interesting, wonderful conversation. That was our second episode. I remember that, getting me very excited about what we would be doing on the Harm Reduction Report. Right after that, episode 3 was when we covered Thirsty for Justice Thursday, which is a weekly event that had been held at the Archives Coffee Shop on campus at University of North Dakota in G-Funk. And it was hosted by Kylie Overson, and she was interviewing Frank White and Michael Dulitz. Frank White, as we've talked about, is our advisor. What was at the time our advisor for the Psychedelic Club, the UND Psychedelic Club, and the Students for Sensible Drug Policy chapter. And Michael Dulitz, who we met at this event, went on to become a great friend of ours and wonderful collaborator and true inspiration. He was speaking, and he had just been hired as the city's new opioid response project coordinator. He works for the Grand Forks Public Health Department. And so episodes 3 and 4 were 2 hours of our coverage of Thirsties for Justice Thursday, where Frank and Michael were talking about substance abuse in G-Funk. That was a really, really good, exciting time. I felt really awesome about the Harm Reduction Report after week 3 and 4 there, because I thought that was really cool how we got to meet those people. And then, it followed up with episode 5 we gave a presentation in Frank White's Drugs and Society class. That was also really fun. We had done this before, but we hadn't recorded it. So we recorded the talk this time, and it was good. Like we all have a lot to learn. Well, I'll speak for myself. I have a lot to learn about public speaking and whatnot. But the presentations, they get better each time we do it. And we've done it about a dozen times now throughout our time in college, less so recently. But that was a good time. That might have been the last one, actually, that presentation that we gave in Frank's class, episode 5. By the way, all these episodes are available on the Sandbagger News YouTube channel in the Harm Reduction Hub playlist. So you can go back and listen to them all. Episode 6 was the Christmas special. This was funny because Cal was... Oh, wait, no. Was Cal there at that time? For one of these episodes, definitely for the G-Funk Human Being, which was episode 8, Cal wasn't even home, and we just threw a party in his apartment while he was gone. I was watching his dog at the time. Actually, I think Cal was at the Christmas special. I think that one happened in my basement. That was a really good time. It was the friends who have helped me with this a lot. We sat in my parents' basement, yes, eating Christmas cookies and reflecting on Christmas-related harm reduction stories, drug-related stories. I remember Cal shared stories about what it was like to be addicted to heroin and methamphetamine on Christmas back in the day when he was going through that. And we shared other stories about drinking on Christmas or like what we would do on winter breaks in high school and college. Reckless things that could have used some harm reduction. There's lots of harm reduction stories associated with Christmas and winter breaks. But then episode 7, after the Christmas special, was our New Year's special episode. That was a wonderful one. I believe we set intentions and thought about what we should all do for the new year in regards to harm reduction, how we can be more mindful and accepting of others so we can reduce the stigma and give everybody the help they need, whatever it may be. Episode 8 after that was indeed the G-Funk Human Being. That was a wonderful one. We definitely threw a party in Cal's house while he was gone. And I was watching his dog. And we talked about, among other things, ketamine treatment. We had a friend over who was explaining that she was getting ketamine-assisted therapy to treat depression. And that was a really interesting conversation. So go ahead and revisit episode 8 if you want to remember what that was all about. Oh, wow. And then the very next episode after this, just 9 weeks into doing the harm reduction report, we did what I think is still our biggest, coolest episode ever. Cal was speaking at an event at the Empire Arts Center. The city was organized this event. They screened a documentary that someone made. I believe it was Blue Cross Blue Shield and some other groups put together a video about the opioid epidemic, as they called it, and screened their video. And after the video, they had a panel. Cal was speaking on the panel, and I was in the back of the house doing two things. Broadcasting the event live on KEQQ radio, 88.3 FM G-Funk. And B, struggling to actually just keep the microphones working for the whole event. I was running sound for the event and broadcasting, and it was I had not a ton of experience doing that at the time, so it was a fun challenge. But Cal was up there doing his part, and I was trying to do mine. But this was such a good time. Actually, we eventually pulled it off. Noah was in the studio helping us do this, so he meshed our show right after his show, doing it live on air, and it was really cool. So it was all three of us were working together on that, and we were able to notice there were, I believe, 11,000 people listening on the online stream. And I think we can expect a decent amount of people listening on the terrestrial radio as well, because after that episode, we got tons of emails and messages from people. And normally we don't get very many. But after this live event, we got lots of messages from people saying things like, oh, thank you, I can relate to this, or now I understand some part of this and I'm going to get my son or daughter help, or, things like that. It was really encouraging, wonderful things that made us feel like it really was worth our effort and worth our time, and that we were doing something good. Sort of. It was quite nice. Yes, indeed. At this point, I was feeling very inspired. That was week 9. By week 11, we had done an episode where we started our stigma video. So one really amazing thing that came out of our work with the city and Michael Dulitz at the Empire Arts Center, week 9, was this job that Michael commissioned us to take part in, to create a video called Faces of Stigma, where we interview basically kids I went to high school with and people my age now who've suffered from different aspects of stigma. They had different needs for harm reduction that were not met, basically, and they share their stories as why that happened and what could be done to prevent it for kids in the future. And that was really great. 11's my favorite number. Week 11, we nail the stigma video. Well, we begin the stigma video. We interviewed Tim, Max, and Cal, who had some wonderful stories for the stigma video. So check out episode 11 if you want to watch the raw interviews there. Episode 12, week 12, I remember I sat down with Walter, my friend Walter, and he explained this thing that he didn't take part in himself, but that he'd heard about at his university, Augsburg, in the Twin Cities, called the Campus Recovery House. It was sort of not a dorm, an alternative to staying in the dorms or a fraternity or something like that. but a house of people who all are in recovery for one thing or another, substance abuse related. And while living in recovery, they have a certain community that is very supportive, and it totally reduces stigma in their environment, so they can help each other out because they all know what they're all going through. None of them are stuck on the stigma, basically. The campus recovery house, that sounded really cool, and we were talking about possibly talking to the people at UND to see if they could start something like that for the students there. Yeah, that was a fun week. Episode 13, I drove to Minneapolis for the, I think what I was there to do actually was volunteer at the syringe exchange program at the Minnesota AIDS Project. Michael Dulitz had paid my gas, so the city public health department had paid my gas to drive down there to spend the day volunteering, basically shadowing at this syringe exchange service, because the Grand Forks was thinking about starting such a program. So I was doing some research for them, basically, and asking them some questions. It was really fun, but the week I was in Minneapolis, I stayed at my friend's house, the Hoff Soup House. And I interviewed Luke and Lizzie, who are both in the video. Oh, and they interviewed me, too. Our 3 interviews in the Stigma video all happened on the Hoff Soup House couch. And you can, if you watch the Stigma video, you'll see that. If you watch episode 13, you can listen to our full interviews. Luke, Lizzie, and I from the Hoff Soup House. Episode 14, we began a discussion about the efforts to legalize marijuana recreationally in North Dakota. And that was something we kept coming back to throughout the coming months. There's also a couple episodes. Episode 15 here was songs. I think Cal and I must have been playing some guitar in that one. Episode 16, Cal attended this event, also organized by the city, talking about addiction in the workplace. And they had, I think it was at the Chamber of Commerce or something, they had a bunch of like business people and the city people talking about how addiction influences workplace environments and like the whole economy of G-Funk. And that was a really interesting discussion. And Cal is, I believe, one of the panelists here. And there's some other great people speaking. So check out episode 15 for that. Excuse me, that's episode 16. Ooh, episode 17. This was a really exciting one. I was stoked about this. We had gone, we were accepted. We pitched a panel to organize a session at a conference, the Students for Sensible Drug Policy Conference in Baltimore. We wanted to have a panel about confidential informants. So we pitched this thing and they accepted us, and we were able to get a great panel together. And I just introduced them and they spoke and told their amazing stories, all about confidential informants, which is something we talked a lot about on the show, which is a real good one when it comes to harm reduction. What are some like policy level decisions we can make to reduce harm? This is a really good topic to get us thinking about that. In this case, it's talking about the policy to basically coerce people, young people and people who might have addictions to go undercover for police in exchange for money or potentially reducing their sentence. This is a thing that goes on in the story from North Dakota about Andrew Sadek, who was a college student in Wahpeton, who was arrested for having a little bit of marijuana in his dorm room. And the cops convinced him he ought to go undercover and work to make his sentence less by ratting on other college kids. Well, in the process of ratting people out, he was discovered and murdered. And that's a wonderfully horrible story that we've talked a lot about. So you can learn more about it on episode 17 here. But the panel consisted of the lawyer who worked with the family of Andrew Sadek to pass Sadek's Law, which now restricts police use of confidential informants. And the other person on the panel that we brought to Baltimore was Matthew Fogg, a retired federal police officer who's written a book about social justice and things like that. He was an officer who worked with confidential informants a lot, and he provides the police perspective sort of on why they're necessary and how they're useful at times, but also best practices that ought to be happening, which aren't. So that was a really amazing panel, really fun time. So grateful to be a part of that, and that SSDP paid for our way out there. So cool. Episode 18, right after that, when we returned from Baltimore, it's called Recap with Songs. So I think I sang some more songs, and maybe I wrote one about the conference. Actually, the next episode must have had more songs too, because it's called Almost Cut My Hair. And this was at a time where I was just learning about the Crosby, Stills, Nash song called Almost Cut My Hair. I found it totally fun. Maybe we'll play it by the end of the episode here. That would be a fun one to revisit for myself, because it's all about this hippie person with long hair who's thinking about cutting his hair because that would be easier to get around in society and people would question him less and, treat him with less suspicion and stuff. But he decides not to give in an inch to fear. And he can't do it, so he stays a long-haired hippie person. Well, at the SSDP conference, I had just met these people who happened to be from Ireland, and they all had remarkable dyed hair. They were blue-haired and pink-haired and gold-haired, and they were truly awesome. And they just gave colored-haired people such a good name that, strangely enough, when I left the conference on the airport, I ran into them. I had said goodbye to them at the hotel a couple days before, after the conference ended, but I ran into them at the airport on our way out of here. And I had a great conversation with them again. And that night when I arrived in Minnesota, my friend who picked me up at the airport brought me back to their place where I was going to spend the night. And there was a hair dyeing party in progress between all my other friends. And I was just in the right place at the right time, in the right mood that my new friends had put me in, that I decided to go for it. And that was the first time I had bright pink hair. And I think I wrote a song about that. Something to say about stigma, and it really doesn't matter what kind of hair you have. That's the simple message of that. So no matter who you are, whether you are a hippie person or, a totally different kind of person, to do something like, for example, have long hair when it's not expected of you to have long hair is kind of an interesting, fun thing to do, because it gets people on all sides of any opinion spectrums on long hair or hippies or anything else to realize that simple thing like, oh, I could be person A or X and have long hair, and it's normal. So don't judge someone for something so silly. That's the point of that one. I guess it has something to do with stigma. And that, in the episode list, brings us to episode 20, week 20, which is we ran the entire audio of our finished Faces of Stigma video. That was right after our trip at SSDP. We finally finished the stigma video, and we haven't totally shared it with the city yet, but we've got the audio of it on episode 20 here, because it's a nice conversation starter between me and, I'm not sure who was on, probably Cal with me that week. And then this is after 20 weeks of the harm reduction report, we finally sort of made an interesting change. That all honestly felt like a really great warm-up and a practice for us figuring out how to do this kind of thing. But it was more than just a warm-up, because all those really wonderful things happened at the Thirsty for Justice Thursday event with our advisor Frank White. We met Michael Dulitz. We then, because of that meeting, got to speak in Frank's class, and also got to do this live Empire Arts Center event with Michael Dulitz, which that itself led to the creation of the Stigma video and my trip to Minneapolis, where I worked at the Syringe Exchange program for a day. And all these fun songs that came out of it. In the meantime, our trip to SSDP, which was supported by Frank White and our UND affiliation, and the instance of the funny colored hair at the end of all that. What a great 20 weeks. Honestly, that might be the greatest phase of the show. Our glory is behind us, but no, I don't actually think so. I think we are going to get as cool as that and even cooler again. But here's episode 21 through 27 was my trip to California. So I was living at the Firebreak Farm on the homestead of Annie Oak, who is one of the pillars in the harm reduction community of the San Francisco Bay Area, and who's worked with all the other pillars of such a community, and has taught me a lot and written lots of books and things about harm reduction. She's a friend of mine, and I was staying there at the Firebreak Farm, and we put out some episodes from there. And while I was there, I got to attend a lot of really special events as Annie's guest. And that allowed me to have some really interesting things to say and, interesting things to cover. I'm not sure how interesting the things I said were. But for example, episode 21 was just an introduction to the fact that where I was, and a little bit about Annie, I think, and where I was in Nevada County, California, which is an interesting place, close to the San Francisco Bay Area, influenced by lots of history, like hippie history and whatnot. Episode 22 was all about John Perry Barlow. So I had John Perry Barlow. He founded the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is an internet rights advocacy group. It's the group that produced the Dropbox website through which Edward Snowden first released his documents, and a lot of other stuff. It's a good organization, and he writes all this great stuff about like freedom in cyberspace, and it's really epic and wonderful. So that's John Perry Barlow. He also wrote music for the Grateful Dead. Aside from being a rancher and like a lot of other things. So I learned all of this at two events. First, at the Internet Archive in San Francisco. It's this really great place. If you go to archive.org, this is the Internet Archive's website. And they are trying to basically host all public domain material and things that are allowed to be shared with everyone. They're trying to actually share it with everyone and put it in one place. And you can download all this stuff for free and use it in your videos or whatever. And it's a really cool place. Well, I attended there was a memorial service for John Perry Barlow being held at the Internet Archive. And as we describe in the episode, it's such an interesting place because it used to be a former church, this big pillared building that they live in on the San Francisco Peninsula, and where they work. And so there's a big like congregation room with tons of pews and stuff. So they hold events up in that room. And in the back of the room, not in the front, in the back are the actual servers that are the Internet Archive, and you can watch them flashing and look right at them and go right up to them. It's really cool. And it was in this big congregation room where tons of people gathered. And I didn't have a ticket to this event, but I was able to volunteer to basically be an usher. And they just let me in for free then. It was awesome. And I got to hang out with the staff and get to know them a little bit by working with them. And I got to meet every single person that came through the door, which was totally epic and great. And I had a wonderful time. It was really overwhelming and great. And also I was learning a lot about John Perry Barlow. And all these wonderful people spoke, said all these great things about him. And they all seemed really, honestly, deeply sincere. And I don't know, maybe a lot of semi-famous people, like they have memorial services where people just talk great about them. Maybe that's everybody's funeral ever. But I didn't, without ever having met Barlow myself. I really feel like a lot of people loved him quite sincerely. And even at this event, Edward Snowden himself, from his hideaway in Russia, Skyped in to this memorial service to share his wonderful words about Barlow. And I was, at this point, pretty convinced I was in a special place. The very next thing that happened, which is also a part of this episode, the Barlow episode, number 22, is another memorial service held in his honor. Well, it was a party concert for Barlow, a farewell concert, basically. All his friends gathered at the Fillmore Auditorium, the classic hippie party spot a band venue where all the greatest hippie bands played and where the whole cultural revolution happened. This sweet venue I'd never been to, which I've read about and seen videos of. I got to go there and listen to all these amazing musicians and artists like sharing stories of Barlow and jamming out in his honor, playing his Grateful Dead songs and lots of other stuff. His own daughters on stage jamming out, and videos of him saying cool things too, and more messages from other people all around the world, like a nonstop incredible list of like famous people saying all these great things about Barlow. It was so much fun. And the best part about it was I was staying with Geraldine Lee, who was basically a part of the Grateful Dead. And she was organizing the concert, the guest list at the Fillmore. And she said she could probably get me in, even though I didn't have a ticket for this either. But the epic thing that happened there was her daughter was also going to be attending this thing, and her daughter had a little baby with her. And Geraldine was like, my daughter's going in the back. And she made these guys open up the back door to like go to the back to this elevator. And I just... push the stroller and that's how I got in, and it was wonderful, a great time, and learned a ton about Barlow. So check that out, that episode out, if you want to also learn a ton about Barlow and more on my crazy adventure. Episode 22. Episode 23 was another phenomenal thing that happened to me. Annie was going to attend another memorial service for another friend of hers who also recently just died, named Dale Pendell. Dale Pendell is an author and scientist and poet and writer, artist from the San Juan Ridge in the north of the Nevada city where I was staying in California. Dale wrote the Pharmacopoeia trilogy, which he's like a botanist, and he explains not just hallucinogenic properties of plants and fungi and stuff, but other properties sort of along those lines. He's the first person to start writing about that kind of thing, and led to tons of other greater things too. And I still know less about him than I do about Barlow, but I attended his memorial service, and so episode 23 is audio from that event. The next 24 was another big one. Okay, this is a pretty good streak of episodes we had here, because this one was about Anne and Sasha Shulgin. So the timing wasn't perfect, like to make this chronology seem so cool, but I had visited the Shulgin farm. At the beginning of my trip, of my stay here, it was about Easter. And the very first day I landed in California, Annie picked me up, and I knew that she was taking me to a brunch somewhere with her friends. It was a thing we were gonna attend together, and it's gonna be cool. But on our way, actually, there, she picked me up, and it's good to see her. We were on our way to the brunch, and it finally starts sinking in. I think I finally asked like whose house we were going to. And she explained that we were going to the Shulgin farm, which is the home of Anne Shulgin, the former home of her husband, Sasha Shulgin. Sasha was a chemist who basically invented a bunch of psychedelic substances throughout the hippie period and way after. And Anne was a writer and sort of a therapist. Well, she wrote about how these psychedelic substances can be used in therapy, and she sort of pioneered the age of using such things with the advice of people like Dale Pendell, who know the science behind them also, and the history and things. That was the age of people creating the substances and ways to use them in therapy. And they've just written all kinds of books, and they're amazing people also, like famous people in the psychedelic movement and also in the harm reduction movement, which are not the same movement, but they do overlap in certain ways. And that's what I realized on this trip to California, also learning about the Shulgins. Those are definitely two different worlds, but the harm reduction world, well, they represent both. So it was a really interesting place for me to be. So check that out just for more about them. And actually what I did was I went back in time and grabbed from online some of footage from Sasha Shulgin's memorial service, which had happened a couple years before. So just it's 3 memorial service episodes in a row. One of them wasn't a recent event, but I do explain my recent visit there on my Easter brunch at the Shulgin farm. Episode 25 was another episode. It's California centric, but it happened for a few months earlier. I was on a previous trip to San Francisco. I attended the World Conference of Science Journalists, where one thing we did was we went to the University of San Francisco campus, and we got to choose which scientists we wanted to have lunch with. And there's this big long list of people, and they're all doing this really interesting stuff. And the name that stood out to me the most was Dr. Roy Girona, because his research was about substances. Particularly, he had done a lot of work in the synthetic cannabinoids. So you may know things like K2 spice is like a similar sort of thing to marijuana, people think, but actually it isn't anymore, because the chemical makeup of these synthetic cannabinoids are so completely changed now because of the way the laws work. They have the people creating them have to keep changing the chemical compound, and now it's so far away from what marijuana ever was that it's really nothing at all like marijuana, and it's totally bad for you, unlike marijuana and things like that. So Dr. Roy Girona, he does work to identify the new compounds and track them and find out what compounds are being used in what parts of the country and stuff, and really interesting. And he shares stories about doing some of this research and hearing about drug-related arrests and overdoses and mix-ups with these strange chemicals. Stories from California. So that's a fun one. Episode 25. Episode 26, which somehow never was uploaded to the YouTube channel until I'm going to do it this week. Randomly, episode 26 is all about Alan Watts, who we've talked about on the show here and there. He is a philosopher, as he would call himself, friends with all the hippie people back in the day, but a theologian also. He was an Episcopalian priest for many years, and then went on to teach about Buddhism at these schools in California. So I just play a different... He's got lots of awesome perspectives on drugs as they were happening in the 60s and 70s. So I sampled some of his talks from that time period, and we made an episode about that, talking about Alan Watts's California experience. That's episode 26. And then finally, to finish our California streak of episodes, there is the episode 27, where I've attended and filmed Annie's workshop that she was helping organize on behalf of the Women's Visionary Council, a risk reduction workshop where they were explaining 4 different things. They had 4 expert speakers giving panel discussions, demonstrations on how to measure and weigh substances carefully so you dose yourself properly, how to use reagent testing kits to see if your substances are contaminated with other common contaminant substances, like, having heroin in what you thought was something else, or having N-bomb in what you thought was LSD or something like that. We had somebody talking about fentanyl testing strips, which is testing specifically for fentanyl in substances you have. And we had a doctor talking about overdose prevention and in the moment how to respond to an opioid overdose. And he certified everybody in the room and gave them doses of Narcan to take home, which is the life-saving antidote you can give to someone who's having an opioid overdose that will revive them. So that was the climax. That was basically the whole point of me being in California at Annie's farm. Was I had agreed to help film this event and help set it up with her. So I just came a couple months early so I could attend these other events and think about California for a while and have these experiences. And all ended in the workshop right before I went back to G-Funk. So that was so much fun. Wow. The California streak is pretty good, actually. I don't know if it's better than the G-Funk streak in the beginning where we went to the Empire and all those other things happened. But the California streak, not bad, I guess, in my opinion, in final review. Moving on, there was a short trilogy of episodes, 28 through 30. I had about 3 weeks I was in Grand Forks after that whole California trip before I would go out into the wilderness all summer. So these 3 weeks, I wanted to sort of recap a lot of things, I guess, about my relationship with G-Funk, because it's very important to us that this show, the Harm Reduction Report, always keep a tab on G-Funk, that, we're playing it on KEQQ because, well, it's my home and this is the community I still want to feel connected with. So although I'm out and about most of my time here, this will be one way we stay connected. We keep thinking about this. And I was feeling into those feelings a lot right after I had come back from California on that last trip. So I made 3 episodes together called Compassion, Memory, and Farewell. And basically they're memories from being in Grand Forks and recapping some feelings we were all having at the time and about what harm reduction is. That one felt pretty good. Making those 3 episodes, it felt good. It was pretty personal. I think I did some poetry or something, But yeah, I had fun with those 3. So those ones are good in my mind. Well, you know what I mean? Right after that was the time in the wilderness. So this was a tough time for me because I was completely away from the show. Basically, it was hard for me to record episodes out where I was, but anywho, Cal did a great job of hosting episodes back in G-Funk while I was out in the wilderness, recruiting friends like Alexander and Tim to engage in conversations, and that was all really wonderful. So I'm so glad that Cal was able to do that, and I threw in one part of an episode at the end where I sang my Sig Olson song about the singing wilderness. After that, we went to Colorado, and this might have been the toughest time for me because I was just, I guess, busy with other things, but I was, whatever, distracted. I don't need to make excuses, but I'm just saying it because that's how I feel. Anywho, the Colorado episodes are not bad, mainly talking about what I was learning about how medical marijuana and recreational marijuana works here in Colorado, especially with taxes and things. I was researching into it because it was happening in North Dakota. They were going to vote on it. So that's what the first couple episodes were about. And my conversation with DJ Tea Time was really great because he's a local guy who's got great perspective on some of these things and a wonderful chill attitude that we can all emulate. I really did like our episode 40, which was about the Red Rocks water problem, which that could be a band name itself, maybe. Red Rocks amphitheater, this famous music venue that I finally went to for the first time, which is out here in Colorado, had no available drinking water for all the people standing out in the sun listening to this long show, drinking and needing water. They had like one crappy little water fountain that there's a 10-mile long line for. Otherwise, they were selling it for much more than free. And so that was a good episode reflecting on that. There was an episode about the UND Psychedelic Club's recent screening of Reefer Madness. And now there is today, where I am very glad to be back on the air thinking about where we want to go from here. So harm reduction takes these many forms. What will we be talking about from here on out? Well, in summary, I think basically we don't need to feel completely compelled for every episode to be about substance abuse specifically. For example, well, I mean, we could kind of make each episode relate to it. Even the Red Rocks water problem is not just about water at music venues. It's about, alcohol use and things that contributed to making the water problem worse. So, there'll probably always be some sort of relation. Well, I don't know. What I'm saying is there's other forms of harm reduction I'd like to get into, particularly because I'm spending a lot of time for my graduate project working on them. So maybe I'll say a quick word about what my grad project is, because I have a feeling that in the next many episodes, I'll be using thoughts and things I'm doing, honestly, for my homework as discussion points for us to talk about harm reduction, especially as it relates to environment issues. This is another stigma-ridden topic, right? Environment. Now, you really want to be careful talking about things like the environment or things like drugs to people, if you don't know their opinions on these things, because you don't want to offend anyone. You don't want to come off the wrong way. And ideally, you want to relate to who you're trying to talk to about whatever it is you're talking about. So, to talk about and harm reduction as it relates to the environment is a good one, too, because all of our food and all of our substances, basically, aside from the ones that Sasha Shulgin invented, come from the environment. Well, basically, my graduate project is about the Boundary Waters, the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in northern Minnesota. It's connected to the Quetico Provincial Park of Canada, so it makes together this internationally protected motorless area for wilderness preservation called the Quetico Superior Boundary Waters. And really beautiful place. It's one of the most visited natural areas in the country, actually. And it has always been a really cool thing, and it's allowed businesses to thrive out there, tourism and wilderness outfitters to live out there and have business there. And people go get to canoe and experience the wilderness, which most of us never have seen like that. I've never seen anything like that. Actually, to this day, I haven't stepped foot into the wilderness area, but the place I lived on the summer was right next to it, and basically the same sort of environment, just not technically in it. And so I feel like I've been there, even though I actually haven't. I still had never seen wilderness like that before. And to think it's right in our own backyard. Wow. We should all go take a trip to Ely this summer. Well, there's an ongoing controversy about mining and its impact on the environment that is going on there. For many years, there have been lots of iron ore mines in the Iron Range. But now a new thing is happening called copper-nickel mining. And it's different. It has likely a much bigger impact on the environment. And it's just different, and it's the minerals that they're actually getting, copper and nickel, are used for different things. And basically my communication research project is to find out who all the stakeholders are in this controversy. Groups that support the mining, groups that are against the mining, lots of people connected with them. Find out how they are communicating and relating with each other about this controversy. How are they sharing information? How are they interacting like that online and just else how? And then use deliberation theories basically to suggest ways or point out or at least understand their current patterns of how they are actually collaborating and like achieving deliberation, where it is when you actually understand the people you're in a controversy with and usually realize you have more common values than you ever thought, things like that. So basically understand who's in this controversy, how are they communicating, and what they can do to understand each other better. And this connects with the history of how the Boundary Waters were formed and everything. So I'll definitely talk about this more in future episodes, about how they went about dealing with the harm that they were being perceived. The harm of like, we're going to lose this wilderness area, is going to be destroyed because of different human activities for different reasons, different people, different motivations. It's being harmed. What do we do about the harm? And eventually there was this legislation that led to the protection of this area, but there's still all kinds of legislation going on now approving these mines, and it's a really tough situation. So it totally applies to talk about in the harm reduction report. And I think what we'll find is we need to have the same sort of attitude of openness and chillness, right, that we have when we're talking about drugs and other stigmatic topics. It's hard to speak about things without acting like your opinion is the best. So let's choose another harm-related topic: environmental destruction. Whether you are on like one far end of the spectrum of believing this happens or even matters, or the other, no problem. But we can both use the same. We can both have the same shared value of wanting to be able to talk to each other well and constantly understand each other sincerely. So let's go in with that mindset and see what we can learn about the Boundary Waters. A second thing I think I'll be talking about for the coming episodes this spring will be Will Steger's expedition into the Arctic. So Will Steger is this guy who lives up in the Boundary Waters. And right now, he's at the age of 75, he's planning another 3-month-long solo expedition, dragging a canoe through the Arctic. And last spring, he did this for 3 months, and he did it a few previous years before that. Will Steger, as you may know, went across Antarctica in 1990, 7-month-long dog sled expedition. And he does things like that. And it's my job to make a daily video of his trip. So when he's up in the Arctic this summer, he'll send me his location and an audio message every night, and I'll whip it into a quick video and share it on his site for him. And there's tons of harm reduction that he does every single day, being completely alone in the wilderness like that. And every night he's got a harm reduction lesson. So I think I'll be able to combine some of his expedition. Maybe I'll just run his little audio messages in full each week here on the Harm Reduction Report and talk about how he's thinking about harm reduction while he's out there by himself. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think that'll be fun. A couple other things on my mind I bet we'll be talking about on the show. I'm taking a class this semester called Health Communication. And one of the things we have to do for the class is build a website where we are communicating about some sort of health-related situation. And actually, when I was back in G-Funk over Christmas a couple weeks ago, I had lunch with Cal and Michael Dulitz, our friend from the Grand Forks Public Health Department, who told me he's trying to make a website for part of their opioid response project, explaining the data they have and stuff. So I think what I'll do is just kill two birds with one stone, which is our favorite thing to joke about doing here on at Sandbagger News. And I will build this website for my class project using data and things from Michael, so I can please both my professor and do something nice for Michael. And actually, it'll probably make my whole job easier because he'll supply me with some things that I can put on this website that I'm required to make for class. So I think it's a great thing. And I think that'll be, I'll update you on how the website's going each week, what I'm adding to it, maybe solicit some feedback if anyone has any ideas what would go on a website like this, what should go on a website like this. As soon as I figure out what it really is I'm making, I'll let you know. That'll be something fun we can talk about. And another thing is I'm trying to write something for this year's publication of Voices of the Valley, which is this annual collection of essays produced by friends who work with, it's associated with the UND Writers Conference, but they have this publication, Voices of the Valley. Aaron and Emily run this thing, Voices of the Valley, and this year's topic that they're soliciting essays about is basically about anti-divisiveness, which is that I don't think it was the word they used, but that's the way I was understanding it. It's like essays about how people from the Red River Valley have stories about people learning to overcome divisive tendencies and to bring people together. So, the whole sandbagger metaphor is obviously really good for this one. Last year, their whole theme was about sandbagger stories. So everything was about the 97 flood. This year, anti-divisiveness. So I think we'll talk about that in relations to harm reduction on the show while I'm doing some brainstorming. Well, our creepy music implies the episode is coming to an end. Thank you sincerely for being here, and thank you for Noah to giving me this opportunity to share. It means so much, and it does feel like my best connection to G-Funk these days. So much appreciated. Thank you all for being here. You know what to do. Sandbag on.